All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah. Either I just got ignored or everyone was busy talking. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. All right. Alhamdulillah. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah, wa ba'd. So before we begin, one disclaimer and one question. So the first disclaimer is, if there's any children here or anyone under the age of 12 or maybe 13, this talk is going to get a little bit graphic in some cases. So if you're a parent and your child is here and you think that you're not comfortable with the child being here, I would probably recommend no one under the age of 13, like the two who just walked in right now. I would recommend that they probably not attend this talk unless you talk about these type of issues with them regularly. If you've already introduced it, you've sat down, you've had the talk, they've attended the class at school, should be okay. Otherwise, usually when I give a talk like this, and I talk about certain things which may be a little bit more graphic or words that may be a little bit more direct, I have some parents coming to me and telling me that, how could you use those type of words? We can't address a topic like this without using certain words and using, describing certain actions. So if you're uncomfortable with that, please, it's better that you're not there. What happened? We lost the computer screen? Okay. Can you help with that? All right, thank you. So that's what I recommend, inshallah. So that's just a disclaimer there. If you're comfortable though, if you talk to your 7-year-old, and you're open with them about it, that's perfectly fine, inshallah. Second thing is, normally in Islam, we're supposed to use more reserved terms. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran talks about, intercourse and things like that, He uses terms like entrance and coming together and touching and these words. So normally it's a good part of our culture to use more reserved words, but because this is a presentation specifically on the topic, we're not going to be using reserved words all the time. So I'm just letting you know, we shouldn't always talk like this, but we're going to talk like this because of the issue that we're discussing today. Okay, so before we begin, quick question: how many of you are pretty clear on your understanding of homosexuality? You pretty have a good understanding, you're pretty confident about your own perception and your understanding? Just raise your hand, please. Okay. How many of you are kind of a little bit confused, you're really not sure, you've not made up your mind exactly on how to look at this issue, and you're kind of trying to figure it out? Just raise your hand, please. Okay. All right. So for the online viewers, just so you know, that was like about 85%, they got it, and 15% or so, maybe 90-10 or 85-15 are still interested in trying to figure out, trying to work things through. Okay, so inshallah, bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So the topic, the title actually of this talk that I had given a few years ago was Islam and Homosexuality, Drawing the Lines. And what I mean by drawing the lines, and lines plural specifically, is because on this topic we have certain things which are clear-cut in Islam and certain things which are scholarly understandings. They're not 100% clear-cut. And it's very important to draw the lines in terms of what is 100% clear-cut, what is right and wrong per se, and what is an explanation or an interpretation, or there's some flexibility in certain aspects. So that's technically the title of the talk, and that's why I called this talk Drawing the Lines. What are we going to cover? First of all, we're going to cover why this issue is important. We're going to talk about the gay rights movement, how it affects us, what the Quran really says about this issue, whether it is a choice or not. Is it a private issue, or should it be, should the public interfere in these type of things? Discrimination that takes place and reverse discrimination, and can someone be a Muslim and gay at the same time? And then some conclusionary notes, and then we'll open it up for questions. Okay? And I'll just remind you now and remind you again, when it's question time, questions do mean questions. So we don't want to have like people giving like talks or speeches during question and answer time. Comments can be done to me personally after the program, inshallah. All right, so why is this issue important? So, first of all, there's a generation gap in the way that the issue of homosexuality has traditionally been understood. This is what's happening right now. So, the way that things work is that for most people, most of their framework about the world and the way in which they understand the world, it usually gets shaped when they're young, when they're going to school, when they're going to high school, when they're going to college. That's the vast majority of people's education. And after that, some people read books here and there, some people watch some movies, they get influenced by media a little bit, but most ideas about the world are usually shaped in those formative years. So if you grew up in the 80s or before that, okay, 70s or 60s or whatever it may be, think about what type of world you were growing up in when it comes to homosexuality. First of all, you were not growing up seeing any movies or any TV shows that show gay people in a positive light. You're not seeing relationships where, there's a gay couple and, they're just, they're the heroes of the story or something like that. You don't find that taking place. You find that the majority of people around you, their perception of homosexuality was that it's gross, that it's a perversion of nature. You grow up with some statistics. 56% of Americans, when surveyed in 1977, said that homosexuality is something which is acquired through either social conditioning or through the environment in which you live, versus 13% who said that this is the way people are born, and the rest said we don't know, right? So we're talking about people whose understanding of the issue was that this is something that people are choosing or they're being conditioned to become in a certain way, and that flips in the next generation, okay? We're talking about a generation where, according to the APA, the American Psychiatric Association, they have listed in their DSM-1 and DSM-2 homosexuality as a mental illness. So imagine growing up in this generation. And for this generation, that group of people growing up in the 80s, or you could even say 90s and prior to that, for them, for Muslims, this was something that's clear-cut haram. There is no debate. There is no discussion. There will not be a single article that is written where someone actually says, well, I beg to differ. I think we should need to relook at the Quran. We need to reinterpret certain things. That's one generation of people who grew up like that. How many of you would describe yourself, say, yeah, that pretty much describes the way that I grew up? Okay. Then we got people growing up in the 21st century. And in the 21st century, things are very different. So what's being presented is that the moral framework of a relationship is, as long as you have two adults that are consenting, the relationship is fine. It's moral. As long as the relationship doesn't harm anyone directly, the relationship is moral. The understanding that when it comes to homosexuality, people should not be ashamed to be able to express their sexual preferences and their sexual feelings in public is something that they're growing up with. The idea of what's called born this way, right? The Lady Gaga song and all of the other ideas that come along with that. This is something that people are growing up listening to on a regular basis in the songs and in the movies that they're hearing. And on a regular basis, you have celebrities coming out of the closet and they're seen as heroes and they're portrayed in the media, right? Why? Because they've broke the stigma that's associated with homosexuality and they're congratulated. The president or some important politician will call them and congratulate them and say, you've done a great job by coming out. So imagine growing up, the people who grew up in this era and the people who grew up in this era. Their perception of this issue is shaped by the way that they grew up. It's shaped by the media experiences, the educational experiences, the social experiences that they have. And that's why my personal opinion on this is something when it comes to the Muslim community that parents and their kids, they're not seeing eye to eye on. they have a very different way of understanding things. Even if they both understand, even if they both say, okay, at the end of the day, okay, we're going to accept the same thing, but their way of dealing with this issue, their way of understanding this issue is different because of the environment in which they grew up. And it's very important to understand that before we even start to approach this. Because you're going to find that people who grew up in the 21st century, this generation, you know, the younger generation, their understanding is shaped by their environment, and likewise the previous generation is shaped by their environment. So that's something from the beginning. Time magazine wrote an article a few years back. This is old, actually. I'm putting all this old stuff out there. They said Islamic orthodoxy and traditionalism is being challenged on the issue of LGBT inclusion. LGBT means lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. That's become the term, but we're specifically talking about LG here, all right? Not the technology brand. All right. So, okay. HP is trying to invade our space here. All right. So, LGBT inclusion. A progressive Muslim movement is forcing Muslim debate and discussion on the limits of tolerance and inclusion. Right, so this is something that non-Muslims are writing about several years back, saying that, hey, Muslims are being pressured now. They need to start, you know, thinking about how they're going to approach this issue and how it's going to affect other people. So the reality is, what's going on here is that, well, this, wow, HP, mashallah, they're persistent. All right, alhamdulillah. So this is not an issue like pork, okay? Rarely would you ever find the Muslim community saying, you know what, when it comes to pork, you know, we should take a look and see whether pork is really prohibited in Islam. Why did Allah prohibit this? What's the wisdom and the reasoning behind it? Most Muslims have a clear understanding that we don't eat pork. That's just the way it is. That's the way you grow up. You check, you know, ingredients for gelatin. You check in, you know, you make sure that there's no pork in your food. That's pretty clear cut. But this issue is not like that issue, right? Pork is one thing. This issue is an issue that's similar to marijuana and similar to the hijab. You will find debates in many Muslim communities, specifically in California, because we happen to be a little bit more of a liberal state. In California specifically, you find debates on marijuana where you find people from younger generation and others saying that no, we think that we can somehow look at Islam and make a case for smoking marijuana is not a problem in Islam. And likewise, many people, they look at the Quran and they say, well, hijab, it's not really, you know, clear cut in the Quran, and we're not sure if it's it's mandatory or not mandatory and all of that. So this is not one of those clear cut things. And that's why it's a very important issue. It's an important issue to discuss. It's an important issue to dialogue about. It's an important issue to debate sometimes. It's important to talk about it, and it's a real issue. And the reason why I'm talking about this is because many people who grew up in the 80s and before that, whenever I give a talk about this, they say, what a useless topic. What a waste of time. Why would you even talk about this? Why don't you talk about like taqwa or how to connect to the Quran or something that's more important? This is a non-issue. There's no point of talking about it. So I'm trying to explain that people who came from that generation, they don't think this is important because for them it's not important. But what they don't realize, and they have to realize, is that for people who grew up in this other generation, it's a very important topic. It's a very serious topic. And they have a lot of questions about this. So it's not a waste of time. We need to understand that off the bat, okay? So when it comes to this challenge, we have this challenge taking place. What is the limits of tolerance and the limits of inclusion when it comes to homosexuality? So many Muslims are confused, not the ones in this room. Only 15% raised their hand and said that they're kind of trying to figure it out. But many people have a lot of questions about this. So whenever we have a question in Islam about something, where do we go? We go to our primary sources. Our primary sources and our number one source in Islam is the Quran. So when we go back to the Quran, that's the first thing we should do. We should go back and we should look what verses in the Quran talk about homosexuality. So what we find is the verses specifically are the verses from the story of Prophet Lut, of Prophet Lot. Now if you do a search, I did a quick search, you tally it, there's about 105 verses in the Quran about Prophet Lut. Okay, throughout different surahs in the Quran. The ones which are most relevant to the topic at hand are these ones which I've chosen, which is from Surah Al-A'raf, chapter 7, verses 80 to 82. So what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? We'll go through them in detail. It says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وَلُوطًا إِذْ قَالَ لِقَوْمِهِ أَتَأْتُونَ الْفَاحِشَةَ مَا سَبَقَكُمْ بِهَا مِنْ أَحَدٍ مِنَ الْعَالَمِينَ. What does that mean? It means, and we sent Lut, we sent Lut, right? And he said to his people, do you commit the shameful act, al-fahisha, in which nobody in the world has ever preceded you? Right, so what is happening here? There's a story of Lut. I can't go through the whole story, but like other prophets, Prophet Lut was sent to his people in order to correct their belief in associating partners with God, in order to correct other immoralities that they were committing. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the God in the Quran, is telling Lut, telling people, remember the story of Lut when he went to his people. This is the way in which he tells the story. He went to his people, and Lut told his people, are you committing the fahisha, right? You're actually coming to people in a shameful way in which nobody in the world has ever preceded you, meaning as a people. This doesn't mean that there's not been a single person who's ever done this in history prior to Lut. It means as a people, as a group of people who practiced it on a openly on a regular basis. This is what it's talking about. Okay, the next verse. إنكم لتأتون الرجال شهوة من دون النساء بل أنتم قوم مسرفون. It says, you come to men lustfully instead of women. No, you are a people who cross the limits. Musrifun means people who take it too far, go extreme. Level of extremism there, right? And then the next verse, it says, وَمَا كَانَ جَوَابَ قَوْمِهِ إِلَّا أَنْ قَالُوا أَخْرِجُوهُمْ مِنْ قَرْيَتِكُمْ إِنَّهُمْ أُنَاسٍ يَتَطَهَّرُونَ. The answer of his people was no other than to say, expel them from your town. They are a people who feign or pretend too much purity. So their response was sarcastic. Let's get rid of these people. Let's get rid of Lut and his followers because of what they're telling us. These people they're too pure for us. Let's just get rid of them. That was kind of like their sarcastic response. They say, if what we're doing is wrong, then you're pure. So we're going to kick you out. So now here's the thing. The Quran is talking about this, and what we find is we find articles coming out on different, websites, sometimes different magazines, saying that we need to relook at the Quran because whatever traditional classical Muslim scholars have said, right? If you look at every single tafsir that's ever been written, as far as my knowledge goes, for the last first 1300 years after the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, the way in which the story of Prophet Lut is interpreted, and these verses specifically, the way in which it's interpreted, it's saying that the people of Lut, one of their sins and one of their crimes was openly practicing homosexuality. But what's happening is you find a group of Muslims who are saying, intellectuals or whatever you want to call them, they're writing and they're saying, this interpretation of the scholars is their interpretation. We need to go back and we need to reinterpret the verses or re-look at the verses to see whether that's really the case, or did they, because they grew up in that generation, right? These Muslim scholars forget the 80s. They grew up in a totally different generation. So what the claim that's being made is that they had their own cultural baggage. And in their tafsir, in their exegesis or the explanation of the Quran, they're projecting that cultural baggage into their own interpretations of the Quran. So that's the argument that's being made. And there's even been a book written about this. I'm not going to promote the book, so I won't tell you the name of the book. I don't really want to promote it, but you can buy it if you want. There are several articles written about it. There are websites, there are groups. There are many people who are making this claim. So I don't want to, I can spend, an hour, breaking all of this down and, explaining this, but just basically what we need to understand is a few things. First of all is the word fahisha, right? So the Arabic word, which I'll highlight here, is here, fahisha. It means a shameful act, right? The word fahisha is negative. It's not something that can be reconstrued as being something somehow neutral or being positive. So the context doesn't really warrant a reinterpretation of the word fahisha to somehow mean something that is non-negative, right? So that's really not open. The second part is that one of the claims that's being made is that this the behavior of the people of Lut, their crime or what they were doing wrong, has to do with the fact that there was no mutual consent. So we talked about the idea of mutually consenting adults. So one of the arguments that's been made is that the reason why Lut was upset, or not upset, but like warning his people and saying you're doing something immoral, is because they were not engaging in consensual sex, basically. This is the argument that has been made. And the way in which the argument has been justified is because at the end of the story of Prophet Lut, there are these angels that come in the form of human beings, and these angels are basically, people are coming and pounding on their door, and they're basically taken away, and they go and engage in homosexuality. Not by willingly, but kind of like it's forced on them. So because the end of the story talks about an incident of kind of like pressure, it doesn't say specifically force, but someone was kind of pressured into doing this, and Lut was trying to stop this. The rest of the story is trying to be reinterpreted as saying that this has to do with rape, has to do with non-consensual sexual relations, and that was the crime of the people. The problem with that is that if you look at only those verses, and you don't look at these verses, and you don't look at the entire story as a whole, there's an inconsistency in that type of reasoning, which is why nobody throughout history has really given an interpretation like this. So we have to come back and ask ourselves the question. The question is, when we're trying to understand or reinterpret the Quran, are we trying to reinterpret the Quran with the intention of trying to figure out what God really meant? What's called intentionality. What was the intention of God in this story? Or is the intention to try to read in our own understanding of the world, or our own values, our own perspectives? And what you'll find, this is interesting, what you'll find is that these are two legally recognized forms of interpretation when it comes to secular law. So when it comes to the US Constitution, there are two madhabs, there are two schools of thoughts, right? The two schools of thoughts are, do we care about the intention of the framers of the United States Constitution when we're looking at what they're saying and we're trying to interpret it? Or do we not care and say, this is the language that we've agreed to follow, and it doesn't matter what the founding fathers had originally intended. We don't care about their intention. We don't care about what they had originally planned. We like these statements, right? Freedom of whatever, religion, freedom of this, all of that's right to bear arms and all of that. But we're going to interpret it the way that we want to interpret it. It doesn't matter what their intention was. So this is something that's recognized legally in the field of law. But the question is, should we apply that framework to the Quran as well, to religion as well? If we do, it's somewhat problematic, because then to what extent are you saying that this book is from God and I'm trying to figure out what God is saying, if you're saying, no, I'm just going to go and read in whatever makes sense to me or whatever I think is going to be right. So this is something that we need to understand. So the root cause of sin, what did it have to do with rape? Did it have to do with consent? This is an issue that's actually being debated seriously today. And it could be further debated. We could have an entire presentation on this. We could have made the whole presentation on this, but I want to talk about other things as well. How many of you have come across this argument, real quick? Raise of hands. Who has come across this argument? Okay. Who actually read the entire article when you came across the argument? Outside of just randomly coming across, you actually read through it. Okay. All right, so about 5 people. All right. The second argument, you read through it? Oh, I thought I saw another hand here. Did I see another hand? Go. Okay, 5. All right, so the second argument is that circumstances have changed today, right? Is that homosexuality was a problem in the past. It was something, bad in the past, but now circumstances have changed. Who's heard this argument before? Anyone? Heard this argument? Okay. So the question is, what has changed exactly? Right? So when circumstances change, the only way in which a reinterpretation of the Quran is going to happen is that the Quran is not being reinterpreted. The word of God is not reinterpreted, but it's reapplied. Right? So in Islam, you have what God is saying to us, right? This is the Quran. And you have what the Prophet is saying to us. This is the Hadith, right? Peace be upon him. But how you apply this in a society will change with time and place. And that's something that's established according to, all Muslim scholars. But the thing here is, how do you change the application of something which is defining what is moral and immoral? Right, so that's why this is not something that I really understand where it's coming from. People are saying things have changed, but what do things that have changed, how does that affect the interpretation of what is considered to be moral and immoral, and how is that changed? Maybe if you have a suggestion, we can bring it up during the Q&A session. So these are the two main arguments that I've come across right now. So when it comes to that, we have to understand that this is the part in Islam that is clear-cut. What's clear-cut is basically, if we understand this part, and we understand the rest of the story of Prophet Lut, we understand, without overstretching the meanings or anything like that, that what the Quran is saying, what Allah is saying, is that the idea of engaging in sexual relations with the same gender is considered to be sinful. It's considered to be something immoral. That's the part that is clear-cut. Now the rest of it is what's called ijtihad. Ijtihad means that scholars apply their best understanding of trying to understand the rest of all of these things. So we're going to talk about why. Why is it considered sinful? And we're going to talk about, is it natural? And if it's natural, then why is this still sinful? And if it's not natural, then what if is it acquired? And to what extent is it acquired versus all of that stuff is ijtihad. And ijtihad means that scholars trying to exert their best understanding to understand the wisdom behind these things, right? So that's the part that's clear-cut. The part that I'm presenting now is my understanding of the issue and the understanding of many scholars. So if there's a mistake there, you can fault me. You cannot fault Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that. So that's why I said drawing the lines. Okay? There's a few different lines that need to be drawn. This is the first line that needs to be drawn. When it comes to Islam, when it comes to the Quran, the issue on the sinfulness or the morality of engaging in the practice of homosexuality is clear-cut to be prohibited and immoral. That's the framework of Islam. The rest is going to come now. So now, first question is it a choice, right? This is something that is a significant source of debate and confusion among people. Like I said, people who were growing up in the 80s and prior to that, their understanding was this is something which is acquired. And now if you ask most people, they will say this is something that is, you're basically born with it. It's not a choice. You don't have the ability, it's something that you can't deal with. It's just you didn't determine this for yourself. So this comes back down to the idea of what is natural. So people say, for example, that if homosexuality is sinful and if it's immoral, also sometimes the word it's unnatural is thrown out. So when you use the word unnatural and someone says, but this is the way I grew up. I've had these feelings ever since I can ever remember. And what did I do? Like, can you specify for me what exactly did I do that, caused me to become like this and have this type of attraction? That actually influences the way in which people perceive the issue of homosexuality. And I'm going to tell you why. Okay, so first of all, the idea of is it natural? Right? The idea of if you feel this way. So the word natural is used incorrectly. So one of the arguments that comes out that a lot of people make is that, look, there are even animals that exhibit gay behavior, gay tendencies. So they engage in homosexual, acts. So you say, if there's animals that do that, then what about human beings, right? The problem with that, who's heard this argument? I'm just trying to make sure. Okay, you've heard this argument. Okay, the problem with that argument is it doesn't really relate to what we're talking about, number one. But the other problem with the argument is that other animals exhibit different type of behaviors. A black widow and a praying mantis will actually eat the male after mating. So if someone says, well, look, it's natural, it's found in nature, that doesn't mean it's moral, right? I want to make that clear, to the sisters. After mating with your husband, you should not eat him, okay? Don't kill him, don't eat him, right? Just because you have other people in the natural kingdom, doing that, right? That doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it justified. So bringing the idea of animals doing something doesn't justify something else, right? We're talking about human beings. And this is actually important. The reason why it's important is because the way in which Islam looks at things, the way that it looks at the world, is that the human being is considered to be something special and distinct. Whereas other people look at the world from a different way. They say the human being is not something special. So, for example, there are many people who do not eat meat. And they say, we do not eat meat, not because of animal cruelty and all of that stuff. We don't eat meat because an animal is a living creature, just like a human being. Would you kill a human being and just eat it? No, obviously not. Would you kill a cow? They say, well, a cow's a living being. It feels pain. So therefore, people who are eating meat, this is immoral. They're killing these animals, and the animals are feeling some type of pain. Or if they're not feeling pain, let's say they feel no pain whatsoever, you've taken away their lifespan. So you could eat a hamburger, right? So that perspective of the world is very different from the perspective of what Islam is saying. Islam is saying that certain rules, regulations, morality, all of these things, they apply to human beings because God defined these things and gave a special status to human beings. So it's a very different perception of the world, and this perception of the world influences the way in which we're going to view this issue as well. Okay? So why does it matter, right? Why does the question about whether being gay is a choice really matter? It matters because it frames an argument for the gay movement, okay? And the argument is this, is that if someone is born gay, then that sexual orientation that they have is an innate characteristic like someone's race. You're born with a race. You were born darker, you were born lighter, you were born with black skin, white skin, brown skin, whatever it is, that's the way you are. Unless you want to go and get like a, Michael Jackson surgery or something like that, you're stuck like this basically, right? That's what's going to happen. So you're going to have to deal with all the consequences of what you are, because you were born that way. So what ends up happening now is that if that argument is conclusive, it's easier to politically make a case to equate racism with discrimination on the basis of sexual preference or sexual orientation. So that's why it's so important to understand these things. This is not, I'm going to talk about how clear-cut and all of that stuff is. But 1977 surveys in America said 56% of people, they thought this is not something you're born with. 13% of people said this is something you're born with. What changed? Afterwards, 2000s, 37% of Americans said it's your upbringing in your environment. 42% said no, people who are born gay, they're born at birth and that's the way they are and they cannot adjust. And this is old statistic, and now it's changed even more. And the percentage continues to rise and rise. The idea of it's not a choice, it's something that you're born with. Why is it important? It's important for two reasons. One, like I said, for political reasons. Because it's going to play a role in the idea of what is discrimination and what is not discrimination. Now, it plays a religious role as well. And the religious role it plays is that the argument is if somebody is born this way and they have these tendencies and they have these feelings and these desires, then why is it sinful for them to act upon them? If it is, and God created them this way, then there's an injustice taking place. And I'm going to answer this question. But that's why it's important. I want you to understand why this question is important. Some people think it doesn't matter, just leave it, it's not an issue. No, it's an issue, and we need to understand why it's viewed as an important issue for two reasons. So like I said, one is the religious reason, because what will happen is anyone who says that this behavior is sinful, then if it's natural or quote unquote whatever you want to call it, then it's unjust. The classifying it as a sin is injustice on God's part. So that's one. And two is the political thing about discrimination that I mentioned. Right? So in the past, there has been many articles in the news and media about the gay gene that was discovered. Anyone came across that article? Do you remember reading that and all of that? So this happened, I forgot when it happened, but it happened a long time ago, all right? What happens with media is that when something comes in the media and it turns out to be wrong and it's debunked, the correction does not make the same type of headline as the original thing that comes in the media. This is exactly what happened with the first time it was discovered that there was a gay gene. The experiment could not be reproduced, right? So they realized that the person who was conducting it was actually secretly a practicing homosexual himself, who was actually conducting the research. They tried to redo the experiment. They were not able to get the same results. But that was a long time ago. But people's in their mind, they thought this is something that already came out. It's clear, it's conclusive, it's proven. So many people had that understanding, but they did not see the retraction of that. Research continued and continued for many, many, many years. The latest research came out of UC Santa Barbara. It's considered to be a liberal school. If you guys are in California, you know about it's like a party school and all that. So UC, sorry for the guys who go there. So UC Santa Barbara recently came out with the latest, and they said, we cannot conclusively say that there is such thing as a gay gene. We cannot identify it. We cannot know for sure if this is the case. We leave it at, we're not sure. That is the official position at the moment, is that we're not sure. The American Psychological Association is very clear on this. They say that there is no consensus. I have the quote here somewhere. There we go. They said there is no consensus among scientists about the exact reasons that an individual develops a heterosexual, bisexual, gay, or lesbian orientation. And this is, as far as I know, up to date. Right? It has not changed. Right? So this is the standard position. But what I want to emphasize is that this medical scientific position is not the position that's in the minds of many people. Right? For in the minds of many people, they think that this is a decided issue. Research has already come out, it's clear cut, you know what, people have said that they feel this way, and this is the reality of things. What's happening is there's a movement within the gay community that is saying the opposite. And they're saying that we were not born this way. We chose to be this way, and it was a conscious decision that we made, and we're very happy with our decision. What has happened to those people who made the statement? Ostracized, criticized. Why? Openly shamed. Because that statement in and of itself is detrimental for the gay rights movement on a political spectrum, politically, for the reasons that I explained why, the whole discrimination thing and all of that. So there is, I want us to understand this very clearly. There is a scientific perspective, there is a religious perspective, and then there's a political perspective. And if we don't see these three different perspectives on this issue, we're going to be very, very confused. And the political perspective influences people's perception of what the scientific perspective actually is. So we have to understand all of these things, and in turn, it influences the religious perspective, and vice versa, all around. So it's important to understand that, okay? Again, the American Psychiatric Association, I mentioned this part already. In 1973, they removed homosexuality as a mental disorder from the DSM-2 and didn't make it into DSM-3. They had a paper explaining their reasons for why they removed it. And in that paper, they mentioned the exact same thing, that we did not remove it because we think that our research has somehow concluded that this is something that people are naturally born with. And you can read the paper. The paper is there, right? So it's important to understand kind of the history of how things have changed, how things are classified versus declassified, and all of these things. Okay, now that's one side. Now coming back from an Islamic perspective, right? From an Islamic perspective, even if people are born with the tendency to do something, what does Islam say about it? What about watching pornography? Okay, watching pornography is not something that's allowed in Islam. If you didn't know that, I just want to clarify that. Okay? It's not something that's allowed in Islam. But is it natural? Is it something that people are naturally attracted to, that they're naturally inclined to? Absolutely. Men specifically, like I mentioned in the khutbah, right, spend billions of dollars looking at pictures and videos of women who wear very little clothing. That's how you sell products. That's something that people are just naturally inclined to. It's natural. But does that mean, does that mean that because you're naturally inclined towards it, you do it? No. So the Islamic perspective is that you may be naturally inclined towards drinking. Someone who's been a drunk, and let's say they're a drug addict, for example. Then they accept Islam, and they're told you're not supposed to do drugs anymore. You say, well, you know what? I'm already addicted to it. What am I supposed to do? You're supposed to resist. You're supposed to stop yourself. Now, there are many other things as well, which I'll come to, but let's see if I'm coming to them. I'll just mention it now. There are many other things that we don't like to talk about. We don't specifically bring up, but we have to bring them up. Okay? So our culture affects the way we view things. There are two things specifically that are still generally viewed by most people as being gross, quote unquote, or being immoral to an extent. One of them is incest. Okay? So incest means having a relationship with your close family member, your sister or your brother, your mother or your father, right? These type of incestual relationships, right, are generally considered by a lot of people to still be kind of off limits. Shouldn't be done for such and such reasons. But it's changing. The perception is changing, and I'm telling you, it probably won't be a decade or two before I have to give a whole presentation again on Islam and incest, and the wisdom behind why and all of that stuff, even though it's still prohibited in many countries. But the second one I want to bring up is bestiality. Okay? And I gave the warning, by the way. So for the young kids that are here, I gave the disclaimer in the beginning that we're going to talk about some things. Okay? I know there's a new term for it, right?
Actually, no, I just want to point out the results of incest is actually catastrophic for the family genetics.
Thank you.
It will literally kill you. Same thing with bestiality.
Inshallah.
That's why we don't do it.
Thank you. All right. So we have so bestiality basically means having sex with animals. Okay? And there's a new term for it. Anyone remind me what the new term is? Zoophilia or something like that? Does anyone know? I guess it's good that you don't know. Okay. All right. So anyway, this is the I'm using the non-politically correct term. There's a politically correct term. What you have to understand is that the majority of Western European countries have outlawed bestiality, and the latest one to do it was in 2015. I believe it was Denmark, or one of those right next to it. The reason why it was outlawed is what happened was this was the last country that did not outlaw bestiality. So what ended up happening is that this became a place for sex tourists to actually go to farms to engage in this behavior. I'm not making this up, right? And you'd be surprised at how prevalent the behavior is, right? It's very prevalent. This happens on a very large scale, and this is not a new thing. This is historical. You do some research on it, and you find that this has been happening in many civilizations throughout history. This is a reality. Again, when we look at that issue, and we look at this issue, it's very important to understand whenever we're talking about sexual desires, we're so used to the word orientation, and we're used to certain framework that we have to think through. We're talking about sexual desires and how they get manifested. Are these things natural or they're not natural? Right? Is bestiality natural or it's not natural? Depends on how you define it, right? It's not an easy question to answer. It's not a black or white question, because sexual desires are natural. But engaging in a relationship with an animal is not a natural manifestation of that desire. And what happens is that you have, and I've been doing a lot of research the whole week on this, you have very little research on the phenomenon of bestiality in the medical community, in the psychiatric community. You have very little research being done on this. And there's complaints. They say, why aren't we studying this phenomenon in more detail? Because it's something that, it's something that's there, to philia, right? So it's something that needs to be looked at. So from the Islamic perspective, if you look at books of Islamic law, what's called books of fiqh, you have Muslim scholars saying in there that if you, male, are attracted to beautiful young boys with smooth faces because they have some feminine characteristics, you need to control your desires. It's not something new. This is something that's been spoken about for a very, very long time. So is the attraction, can it be natural? From the sexual perspective, yes. Is it considered a normal or however you want to define morally normal manifestation of that? No. And there's a reason behind that. So that's why when we talk about terminology and we're talking about words, it's very important that we define and we understand things like what does the word normal mean and what does the word natural mean and what do we mean by these terms. We have to define these terms in detail. So this is a very important aspect of things. All right. So from the perspective of Islam, right? From the perspective of Islam, whether it's a choice or it's not a choice is not 100% relevant. The reason why it's not relevant is because oftentimes we have inclinations to do some things, we have desires to do things, and that's simply part of our test in life. You can desire your best friend's wife because she's very beautiful, or vice versa, or whatever. Just because you have that attraction or that desire to that person doesn't mean that you can engage in that desire. Doesn't mean that it's good. There's a problem with that, right? So this is the reality in Islam, is that when it comes to the idea of normal versus natural, even if Allah has created us with certain desires, that is part of the test to be able to control and resist those desires. And people have different tests. People are born in war zones and they grow up under oppressive regimes. That's their test in life. So the idea, the framework of saying, if you're born like that, then why is it just or unjust for God to test you with that? That is a purely secular framework of determining what is moral and immoral. But from an Islamic framework, life is a test. And there's nothing wrong with Allah giving us different types of tests and different types of inclinations and then saying, now you need to restrict yourself from engaging in these things. That's the Islamic perspective on the issue. And what Allah says, what the Prophet, peace be upon him, he said, if somebody intended to do a bad deed and he didn't do that bad deed, then Allah will write one full good deed for that person because they stopped that thing from happening. Right, so this is the perspective there. Moving on. Is it a private issue? Okay? So this is an important aspect of things. Is homosexuality a private issue or is it a public issue? What should Muslims' perspective be in terms of, the idea of welcoming this or promoting this in society? And that's the reason why we bring this up, is because there are many Muslims who are, what's the right way to frame it? Who are promoters of the gay rights movement. And they say we should be part and parcel of this, right? So that's why this issue comes up of whether it's private versus public. There are certain issues which are public which affect us. You can walk around naked in your house, but you can't walk around naked in public. On certain beaches you can. In many restaurants you cannot. Why? Because it's a public issue. Can you display pornography in public? In America, you cannot. But in Europe, you can. So this is, if you haven't been to Europe, you walk into a gas station, right? And you will see those adult, quote unquote, adult pornographic magazines. They're right there on display and they're not behind. They're literally on display in the front. So you walk in with your 5-year-old to go and pay for your gas, your petrol or whatever they call it there, and they will, your son will just, your daughter or someone will just look at the magazine. It's right there open in display. Many European countries, right? That's just the way it is, right? They have casinos and slot machines inside of grocery stores. So you imagine you walk in your Vons or your Albertsons, before you even get there, you look over there and you see a slot machine. People go to the slot machine, and the money they had for groceries, they'll gamble it away, and they're not getting any food because they just spent it all. That's the way it's perceived, right? So there are issues that are moral issues, but what's happening is from the secular perspective, moral issues are seen as something that's private. You know, you practice your religion, I practice my religion, he doesn't practice any religion. Our morality is whatever you do on a private level. But there's a public sphere. And morality affects the public sphere. The same way nudity affects the public sphere, pornography affects the public sphere, gambling affects the public sphere. All of these things affect. So if you had to vote and have to decide, should we legalize prostitution or should we criminalize prostitution? Is prostitution legalized in Orange County? Is it like a red light district or something like that? No. If there was a law that was being passed to legalize prostitution, and someone said, hey, this is their right, you should not interfere in your right, you cannot force your moral vision of the world onto other people who do not see anything immoral with that. You go to Amsterdam, and there's red light districts all over the place. You walk by, I remember when I was a 16-year-old, I don't know why, I somehow ended up in Amsterdam. It was a flight, we got stuck basically. So walking by and you see someone in a, people sell you products like there's display windows when you're walking by. There are women in the display windows while you're walking down the street and they're like calling you. That's the culture over there. And you could talk about the harms and the benefits or whatever of that, financial independence and all of that. But the point is that moral issues play a role in the public sphere. And that's why the idea of supporting gay marriage and not supporting gay marriage, I know it's too late now, it's already done. But in retrospect, the idea of Muslims taking a stance or making a decision on what type of society they would like to see plays a major role, and many Muslims are confused about that. They don't know exactly what to think about that. So that's where we come to the idea of pluralism. Okay, well, let me say one thing on this. So when it comes to these type of issues, it is not a haram halal issue. It's not a haram halal issue. So let me give you an example like pork. Okay, if the United States of America had a law about to be voted, whether to outlaw and ban pork or whether to keep it legal, are Muslims legally or Islamically obliged to vote that pork needs to be banned? Some people would think yes, right? But the answer is no. The answer is no. Because this does not affect this does not affect the public. And that's why in Muslim societies in the past, real Islamic states in the past, right? What used to happen is that Christians who were living as minorities under Muslim rule, or even as majorities under Muslim rule, they were allowed to have their pigs. And they would slaughter their pigs and they would eat their pork. And they were allowed to have their alcohol for their religious ceremonies. And they could go and do the communion with the wine drinking and stuff like that. Because it's not affecting the public good. It's not going to be tempting other people. But when it comes to public issues, there's something else, right? So that's the idea of pluralism that we need to understand. Who's heard the word pluralism before? Okay. So pluralism, in a nutshell, basically is a framework on how we can live with other people and deal with other people, basically. It means that we're kind of agreeing to disagree and respect each other, and you do your thing and I do my thing, and I won't infringe on what you're doing, you don't infringe on what I'm doing. So you got, let's say, a Muslim, Jew, Christian, and an atheist, and they're all sitting there, and he says, look, you don't want to believe in God? Okay, I'm fine with that. And the Jew looks at the Muslim, says, you want to believe in Prophet Muhammad? Okay, I'm fine with that. You can believe in that, I don't believe in that. The Christian says the same thing to everyone else, and they all live together, and they kind of come to a common framework and say, what can we agree upon? What kind of society would we like to live? What kind of laws should we have in our own society that we kind of generally agree upon and we think is good for all of us? That's pluralism. Different from relativism. Relativism or moral relativism is where the atheist says, look, I don't believe in God, but I believe in Islam as well. And then the Muslim goes, you know what? I don't believe that Jesus is God, but I also accept the Trinity that you're believing. And the Jew looks at both of them and says, I also believe in Jesus and Muhammad, although technically I don't believe that they're prophets, but I accept them. Something is wrong with that framework. There's a difference between pluralism in the sense that you maintain your truth, your understanding, your concept of truth, but you're willing to deal with other people in certain ways. That's what pluralism is. And that's what this idea of the gay marriage and, transgender bathrooms and all of these things, it all comes back down to how should pluralism be defined, right? To what extent or what level do we want to regulate what's there in the public, and how is that going to affect our society? How is it going to affect our family? How is it going to affect our culture? How is it going to affect our city? All of these things we need to understand, okay? There's no need to spy on people. If they're doing something privately in their home, they can do whatever they want, right? But in the public sphere, it's going to affect everyone else, so that's where it comes back into. So when it comes to this issue, like I said, it's not black or white. It's not black or white. So there have been some Muslim scholars, very few, but some, who actually said that we can make a case for Muslims supporting gay marriage. How? Right? Someone will think, how? How can they say something like that? Well, what they're saying is this. They're saying this is an issue of the public good, what's called maslahah. So the maslahah for them was that right now, the idea of one man marrying one woman is a Christian conception of marriage. And what that's going to do is, if you look at what's going on with the, Republican Party and, really, far right conservatives, they're not being the most responsible when it comes to other issues, right? So we see there's a problem there. So what he's saying is, by actually overturning the idea, the conservative Christian idea of what marriage is, and by removing government's interference into what marriage is supposed to be, we will actually be able to secure more religious freedom for minority groups. So he's saying that's a framework. And of course, the counter response to that is that there's actually potentially more harm that can result from that. Because what's going to happen is it will normalize the behavior on an even greater level, on an educational level, on a discrimination level and all of that, and now people's right to free speech to say that they do not approve of this behavior is going to be more and more restricted with that type of thing. So that's the argument. The vote is not there anymore, so it's done anyways, but that's the framework, that's the way that it was happening. So that's the idea of gay marriage, common good, all of that stuff, private issue. Keep in mind, when I say gay marriage, I'm not talking about between Muslims. So when it comes to Islam, marriage is not allowed between people of the same gender. So it's not going to happen where someone comes into, where's Sheikh Faqih? I know he's hiding here somewhere. All right, he wasn't on. It's not going to come to his office and say, look, Muhammad and Ali would like to get married. Can you perform the nikah ceremony? Right? He cannot do it. He's not able to do it. Right? But what's very important is he needs to maintain the right to be able to say no without getting a discrimination lawsuit against him. Because there have been people who've had lawsuits against them. Say, you have no right to discriminate against me because you're technically violating the law of California, which says you're discriminating on the basis of sexual orientation. But of course, a private institution, so at the moment they're protected, but it may not be in a year or 2 years or something like that. So that's where it comes from, right? So that I wanted to make that point clear. Let's move on. Discrimination. How do you deal with discrimination, all right? So people who are from the 80s and prior to that, there is discrimination against people who exhibit homosexual tendencies, regardless of whether they practice or they don't practice, right? The question is that justified in Islam? Is that something that should be happening? So let's take an example. Someone is a prostitute. You believe prostitution is immoral. In Islam, prostitution is immoral. So you own a grocery store. Can that person, if they walk in and you identify that woman or that man or whatever as a prostitute, should you deny them the groceries that you're selling? There's no basis for doing that, right? Because regardless of whatever immorality they're engaging or sin they're engaging them, you not selling them groceries is not really going to help them to stop doing that. And they're human beings at the end of the day. You can sell to whoever. But this became an American issue when Chick-fil-A, you guys heard about, said we don't want to sell to people who are gay. And then they would protest and counter-protest and all of these things. This is not something that's there in Islam. So what we have to understand, I want to really make you understand this, is that this whole debate in America between, between one side and the other, between conservatives and liberals on homosexuality, it's not so much our debate in the sense of Muslims. We're kind of in the middle somewhere. You have people like this saying, we're not even going to sell you our products. And on the flip side, you have the opposite. And they're saying, you know what? We should, we should be able to have gay marriage. We should be able to sue you for discrimination. We should be able to do all of these things. So this is not an issue from that perspective, okay? That's the first point. The second point is, when it comes to Muslims, we're not supposed to go and abuse and insult people who are engaging in something that we consider to be sinful. So we're not supposed to, because they can change. They can maybe become better than you, right? So in insulting people, looking down upon them, all of that, it's not supposed to be there in Islam. That's discrimination. And you can work with people who happen to be engaging in whatever behavior, whether it's alcoholic or someone is drinking alcohol or doing whatever it is. You can engage with them on issues that you agree with, and there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, so I wanted to make that very clear. There's also something of, there's also reverse discrimination. So this is a problem as well. So discrimination is a problem, but reverse discrimination is a problem as well. So if you wanted to bake a cake, you're a baker, and someone invites you and say, I want you to make a cake, and I want you to put, Mary and Aisha on the cake together because they're both getting married, right? So you say, okay, well, this kind of violates my religious belief because I feel that this is immoral and now I'm promoting a certain type of behavior. It's not that I'm not selling you groceries, but I'm promoting a certain type of thing. You want me to cater to your wedding. I don't feel comfortable catering to this wedding. Now you have discrimination suit against you. That's one case. Firefox. Who uses Firefox browser? No one uses the Firefox browser? You use Chrome nowadays? Okay, so, all right. I use all four, so that's fine. Alhamdulillah. So Firefox is a browser. It used to be Netscape, Navigator, and all that. So back in the days, right, when you only had two choices. This is a company called Mozilla. The CEO of Mozilla was forced to resign from his company in 2014. Why? He didn't make a single statement against homosexuality. He didn't make a single statement against homosexuals. But he donated to a cause which was supporting the prevention of the gay marriage law in California. And because of that, he was basically pressured so much to resign from his position. And that's a type of reverse discrimination. You cannot even say, unfortunately, you cannot even say that, you know what, I would like to support this law, or I support, the idea of family, or whatever it is, whatever my definition happens to be. That's a problem. So reverse discrimination is also a problem. They're both problems, right? And lastly, there's a difference between accepting a person and accepting the practice of a person, right? So I don't want to keep going in this. I need to move on. All right. Can I be a Muslim and gay? I want you to understand. I worded this question specifically like this. All right? Can I be Muslim and gay? All right? So the thing is, it's yes. And the reason why it's yes is because if someone, let me explain two things to you. There's something called same-sex attraction. Someone is attracted to someone of the same sex, same gender. And there's engaging in the practice of homosexuality. Okay? These are two separate things. But what we need to understand is these two separate things, right? One of them is considered to be sinful, the other one is not sinful. SSA, same-sex attraction, having the feeling is not sinful unless you act upon it. Acting upon it is sinful, but it's not kufr. It's not disbelief. The person still remains a Muslim. This is something that's important to understand. So it doesn't make a person a disbeliever. All right? But when someone says, can I be Muslim and can I be gay? If you mean, is it all right and it's not sinful and there's nothing wrong with engaging in the practice of homosexuality, then no. Then you're talking about something else. That's why you have to be very careful about the wording. Because many people, they've asked the question to different scholars. They say, is there a place for gay Muslims in the masjid? So what do you mean by that? Is there a place for them? Right? It can mean two things. Meaning that are people who identify as that, engage in that, are happy with that, they went and performed a marriage or whatever it is, can they be part of the Muslim community? Can they pray? Can they attend FFN? Can they attend our archery event tomorrow? Can they do all of these things? Yes. Can they come in and propagate their views and say, you know what, you have to accept that, I have this legitimate opinion and everything else? No. So there's a difference between making a space and acceptance. Acceptance as a person versus acceptance of the act needs to be differentiated between that. All right, so that's important. Lastly, I know I'm running out on time, so I want to make sure there's time for open queue. So I'm going to cut this short. We probably need a longer 3-hour seminar on this topic to really do it justice. But to finish up, we need support groups. I want to be very, very clear with you. I get people every month emailing me and saying, look, Sheikh, I have these same desires and I have this same-sex attraction and I don't know what to do about it and I don't know when it started and I don't choose it and it's driving me crazy and I'm not trying to, reinterpret the Quran. I'm not trying to do anything else, but I don't know what's going to happen to me. And I'm not talking about 1 or 2 or 3 people. I'm talking dozens of people reaching out. I talked to Sheikh Omar Suleiman, same things happening to him. Sheikh Yasser Qadi, same things happening to him. We're getting tons of people asking us these questions. This is a very serious issue. And one of the things which exacerbates the issue, it makes it worse, is they say, I tried to bring up the topic in my youth group, and all the Muslims just started making fun of me. And they started laughing and just shut me down. And what ends up happening is like, now I'm struggling with my faith. I don't even know whether I can be part of the community or not anymore. This is a problem. It's not just a problem that they're going through. It's a problem for the whole community because of the way people are responding to this. And I want to make it very clear, is that regardless of what's going on or whether it's social environment, conditional and all of that stuff, there are practicing Muslims who pray 5 times a day. Their prayer, the khushu', the concentration in their prayer is greater than mine and yours combined. And they're struggling with this issue. So it's a serious thing. It's not something that should be taken lightly. And it's not something that should just be joked off, right? So we need to be very careful about this. And we really need support groups for people, Muslims specifically, who are going through this. Because they don't know how to deal with it. And most imams don't know how to deal with it. I don't exactly know how to deal with it. I'm learning a little bit as I go along, but we don't exactly know how to deal with this case. But there needs to be some advice. These people are still Muslim. These people are still praying. These people still read the Quran. There are people who've memorized the entire Quran and they're dealing with this. Some people think, no, it can't be. How can someone memorize? We have really weird conceptions of things. How can someone memorize the Quran and somehow be dealing with this? This is the reality. If you think something's wrong with that, then something is wrong with your understanding. I just need to throw these things out there to clarify. You can have someone who went and studied 10 years of Sharia and they're going to be dealing with this issue. This is the reality. Right? So it's important to understand that, and it's important to learn how to deal with these things. First thing you can do is be supportive and not shut people down, especially when they're struggling. When they're trying to convince you to change what Islam says, that's a whole different ballgame. When someone is struggling with this and they're saying, I need to know what to do with this and what am I supposed to do, that's a totally different thing. So it's very important to understand that point. There was one of the companions of the Prophet, one of the Sahaba, he used to be a drinker and he used to drink a lot. And one time he got drunk and he used to drink a lot. So one time he got drunk and the other Sahaba, they brought him in and they started cursing this guy. And the Prophet ﷺ stopped them. He said, don't curse him. He loves Allah and His Messenger. So this guy has a drinking problem. Yes, we're not justifying his drinking problem. He's got a problem. But that doesn't negate everything else. And our job is to support people like this. So we need to adjust our attitude when it comes to this. All right? Conclusion, and then I'll open up to questions. This is a very serious issue. Take it seriously. Number 2, we need education on this issue. Because if I'm speaking to a more elder generation, if you think that because you grew up a certain way, then all of a sudden your kids are automatically going to become that way, it's simply not going to happen for all the reasons that I mentioned at the beginning. It's a different generation. It's a different influx of information that is being presented. It's a different culture. There needs to be proper education and discussions on this. Like I said, support is needed. And a few things we need to start practicing from the Prophet ﷺ. Because again, we don't know exactly for sure how this happens. But we know that there are certain measures that we're recommended to do, which we're generally not doing. So here's some advice I want to give you. Right? The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, order your children to pray when they're 7. Discipline them when they reach the age of 10 for prayer. And separate their beds. Now prayer is very, very important at a young age, because it helps establish strong faith. But separating their beds at this age is basically saying that you don't leave them in the same bed. They have a separate bed. Now, we could reflect upon this for a long time. Think about the wisdom behind that, and you'll see that this plays into what we're talking about here. The Prophet, peace upon him, said, young men, whoever is able to should get married, and whoever cannot should fast, and that will be a protection for him. So the idea of fasting and learning to control our desires, we live in a society where we act upon our desires as quickly as possible. You have Tinder app and you keep flipping through different people, looking. I know you guys are laughing because you do it, right? People are doing it, right? You have people, they want a different flavor. They want a different phone. They want to upgrade something. They feel like they have to have something right now. So when desires are out of control, it affects all the type of desires that you have that are out of control. And lastly, Allah teaches us in the Quran, do not ascribe purity to yourselves. وَلَا تُزَكُّوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. People are struggling with this issue. They're dealing with it. Don't think that you're better than somebody else. In the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, someone who struggles with this may be much higher than you because you don't struggle with the same thing. Inshallah. We're going to open it up for questions, inshallah. We have some microphones. We have our youth, alhamdulillah, on the microphone. I want to help and encourage the youth to do what we generally do during question time. So we really need only questions. Only questions. If I don't see a question coming, I'm going to have to stop you, and I'm going to help the people who have the microphone to be able to take the microphone away from you. Because I know people who are elder, they're going to be like, this young person, they can't get the microphone away from me. I got your back, don't worry. Go ahead.
So just to clarify, you brought up the example of, Ali and Umar, I believe it was. If they go to a sheikh, they cannot get married. However, say they chose to get married in the state of California. California would recognize them as a married couple. Does that mean that they would no longer be considered Muslim?
No. No. I'll repeat that for the, does the question go on the live stream or no? Okay, so the question was, Ali and Umar go to the masjid, and the imam says they cannot get married, so they go to the state of California, they get married from the state of California. Are they not Muslim anymore? The answer is no.
I have a question about what you said with voting, or signing petitions and things, because I know the LGBT community supported Muslims during the Muslim bans. They spoke up against that. So when we get things, we're getting all these petitions now. Something like today I got one with Trump, and he banned transgender, I believe, in the military. So asking you to sign that. As a Muslim, should you sign that or not?
So sign the petition for what?
Different petitions. Like today, one came through saying to sign
Okay,
a
so
petition against
to
Trump.
understand your question is basically because the gay community supports Muslims on Muslim issues, like the Muslim ban, should we support them on their issues? Is that your question?
If they're being discriminated against.
If they're being discriminated against. Okay, so there's nuance to the answer. So the question is, if someone is being discriminated against along the lines of what I mentioned in terms of not being sold products or being denied certain basic human rights, then yes, absolutely, we should definitely support them. When it comes to other issues in terms of promoting their moral values, that's an issue that's going to be on a case-by-case basis, because sometimes discrimination is claimed, but while combating it, you're actually promoting certain moral values. And we have to be careful about publicly promoting moral values that conflict with our moral values unless they're really not a problem for the society at large. Okay. Next question.
Right here. My simple question, the $1 million question here. Is it or is it not forbidden in Islam?
All right, I'll give you the $1 billion answer.
I don't get it anymore. This is confused.
I'll give you the $1 billion answer.
Okay, I'm waiting.
Same-sex attraction is not unlawful in Islam. Practicing homosexuality is unlawful in Islam.
So, homosexuality is forbidden in Islam like pork, like eating pork.
Okay, so when you say homosexuality, it can mean two things. It can mean same-sex attraction, or it can mean engaging in the act. So the attraction is not prohibited, the act is prohibited. Does that make sense?
Wow.
Who understood that answer? Just raise your hand. Alhamdulillah. So I'm not going crazy. Okay, alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Next. Is it off? Okay, go ahead, speak loud.
What does it mean as a Muslim to be an ally to the
LGBT community, yeah. So what does it mean as a Muslim to be an ally to the LGBT movement or IQ or it keeps going? So what it means is when you're an ally, you need to define what you mean by being an ally, right? Does that mean that you're going to support every single cause that group promotes, right? And if that's the case, then it can be very problematic because you're promoting certain moral values which are actually probably going to affect you as a person and affect your family or affect the society as a whole. So some things are going to be fine and some things are not going to be fine. So it's on a case-by-case basis. That's why when we ally with people, we should not ally with them in general. Like we don't say, we're going to ally with Christians on every Christian cause. That's not the case, right? If a Christian is being discriminated against, if a Christian is going through poverty or something like that, we can ally with them on that. We should never ally with any group on all of their causes as a group. And that's very, very important. It should be on a case-by-case basis, on a specific incident-by-incident basis.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu.
Okay, you said same-sex attraction is okay, and acting is haram. Okay, that's what I hear. I think. Okay, let's say verse. You selling whiskey is halal, or you drinking whiskey is haram. Can you make clear explanation?
I'll take your example. Okay, being attracted to whiskey is halal, and drinking whiskey is haram. You said selling? Oh, selling whiskey. Okay. I don't understand. I'm not understanding the example. What does selling whiskey have to do with? Right. But are you talking about whiskey or are you talking about homosexuality? Are you making an example? Yeah, but I'm not understanding where selling somehow. Right. So you're saying selling whiskey is like same-sex attraction? Yes. Okay. But how? I don't understand how. Yeah, it's haram. You should not sell whiskey. Yeah. Okay, let me ask you: is being addicted to whiskey but not drinking it, is it haram? Is it haram to be addicted? You're craving it, but you don't drink it. Is it haram? It's not. That's the same issue. Inshallah. Next question.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.
This is more of a hypothetical question, but what is the main difference between punishing somebody and the criteria for punishing somebody for committing zina, and the punishment for somebody committing a homosexual act in Islamic law?
Okay. So, what is the criteria for punishing someone committing adultery versus someone committing a homosexual act? So, scholars have actually differed on this. And the main difference is, many scholars have said it's like adultery. So, you're engaging in something outside of the realm of marriage, it's the same punishment as fornication or adultery. Imam Abu Hanifa and Ibn Hazm and others, their opinion is that this is not the same. It's actually a lesser of a penalty because it's not considered to be intercourse, technically. So they viewed it as something different than intercourse. So the penalty is just a discretionary punishment, whatever, it could be a slap on the wrist or a glance or a look or something like that. So it's actually less. So there's a difference of opinion on that.
Last question, I'm sorry. They're waiting to pray.
Okay.
So this has to be
I'll stick around. If anyone wants to ask me questions afterwards, I'll stick around after the prayer, inshallah.
No sisters? No sisters that haven't asked any questions yet? There's a ton of brothers, so... Okay.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.
So when you said in Islamic perspective, is homosexuality a choice or not? You said that it depends.
So I said in Islam, is homosexuality a choice? It's not clear cut. It's ijtihad. The ijtihad of whether or not it's a choice. We don't know for sure.
Right. So having the desire is not a sinful act, but doing the act is a sinful act. That
Right.
means it is a choice of a person to do that act or not. So to me, according to Islam, it is a choice then.
What I meant same-sex attraction, whether that's a choice or not. Does that?
Even doing the act,
Right.
to me, it seems like that it is a choice of a person. If I have the desire, then that's great. But if I do the act, it is my
Yeah,
choice to do the act or not.
No, you're right. Doing the act is a choice. What I meant was, is same-sex attraction a choice or not a choice? Is that clear? Yeah.
Sorry, that's it. We gotta end.
Okay, inshallah. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us a deeper understanding of this issue and to purify our hearts. Ameen. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Assalamu alaikum.
Part two, yes? Raise your hand. Okay.
All right. Anyone interested in a discussion on transgenderism?